Good afternoon. This is Dan Reilly with the National Weather Service, the Houston Galveston office. I'd like to speak to you today about the 2020 hurricane season in review and a look ahead to 2021. Satellite photo here shows Hurricane Laura over the Gulf there. You can also see the city lights along the Gulf Coast. So let's go ahead and get started. So to say last year was an active season would be an understatement. It was the most active season on record in terms of the number of named storms, and second to first in terms of the number of hurricanes. You can see all the tracks there in the Atlantic Ocean, and notice all the activity in the Gulf of Mexico. Very, very active in the Gulf. The only comparable year was 2005, when we had 28 named storms and 15 hurricanes. And as I said, in 2020, we had 30 named storms and 13. You can see there were 5 landfalls in Louisiana alone. They really were the ground zero last year for hurricanes. Here's a look at satellite images of all of our storms. You can see all 30 there in a mosaic, all the way from Arthur to Iota. And no, Iota is not a normal name for a hurricane. The Greek alphabet is used in hyperactive storms when we have more than 21 named storms. And this was the only year other than 2005 that we've ever had to do that. So looking ahead, what are our named storms going forward? First, in the upper right, you can see all the names crossed off that were used. We still had quite a few Greek letters that could have been used in theory, but 30 is certainly enough as far as the number of named storms. The lists of names are predefined for 2021 all the way out to 2026, and then the 2021 list will be used again in 2027. However, a name may be retired if it makes a big impact. So, for example, last year, Laura was retired. It had such a big impact on the United States, there will never be a Hurricane Laura again. But if the name is not retired, the list will be reused every 7th year. Now, one change this year, the Greek alphabet will no longer be used for a hyperactive season like we had last year. Instead, there's an alternate list not shown here that can be pulled from as needed. So in the unlikely event we get more than 21 named storms, in other words, on the 2021 list, if we go beyond Wanda, we won't go to the Greek alphabet, we'll go to a separate list. Here's another way to look at hurricane activity and compare 2020 to the other years using this bar chart, where the purple indicates the number of major hurricanes category 3 or higher, the red indicates the number of hurricanes, and then the gray indicates the number of named storms, which of course includes hurricanes and tropical storms. And you can see in terms of number of named storms, 2020 was a year without equal. 2005, however, was right behind with 28 named storms, and 2005 actually had more hurricanes. You may remember 2005 was the year we had Katrina and Rita, so very, very impactful year as well. But when you get beyond that, every other year is nowhere close to as busy as we were in 2020. Looking at the landfalls last year, you can see all the landfalls along the Gulf Coast, just very, very busy, all along the Gulf Coast from Texas to Florida, where Louisiana was hit especially hard. Look at all the landfalls there in the state of Louisiana, 5 there alone. This is another way to look at the season last year. Basically, it counts the number of hours spent in a Hurricane Center 5-day forecast cone. And from this you can see very clearly Louisiana is all lit up. They were really ground zero for many hurricanes, often in the forecast track. But you can see really most of the southeastern U.S. and much of the East Coast spent some time in a hurricane center forecast cone. But really what lights up there is far east Texas across Louisiana and into Mississippi. Yet another way to look at how widespread the activity was last year. These are some of the watches and warnings from a number of these storms. You can see the names listed along the coast. And pretty much every county along the coast, almost, was under some sort of hurricane watch or warning, or at least a tropical storm warning. And what else do we have there? In pink, we have storm surge warnings. So the Gulf Coast, of course, was hit especially hard. Probably the Florida Panhandle the least so last year. But really, every county from Brownsville up to eastern Maine was under some sort of tropical watch or warning last year. And then I won't read all these, but you can see some of the numbers for 2020. 13 hurricanes, the average is 6. 6 major hurricanes, the average is 3. 12 storms hit the U.S. coast. The previous record was 9. So not only did we have a lot of storms, many were impactful hitting the coast, and 5 in Louisiana alone. 10 storms formed in September. That's the most for any month on record. And this is important. We had 10 rapidly intensifying storms, meaning they went from a weaker storm to a much stronger storm very quickly. And those can be especially dangerous, as we know, especially if that rapid intensification occurs near the coast and is not forecast. And you can see there are 30 named storms. Let's look at a few specifically, especially those that impacted the Texas coast. This was Hurricane Hanna back in late July, and you can see that swirl there. You can see the hurricane making landfall there in South Texas. What are we looking at there? We can see the swirling circulation, the counterclockwise swirl of the hurricane, and then that little hole in the middle of that pattern is the eye of the storm. This was a Category 2 hurricane, actually a Category 1 hurricane, making landfall, produced a lot of high winds down the coast and also some high surf, not only in South Texas, but all the way up the coast. Hurricane Laura was probably the most frightening storm for the Houston-Galveston region. This was a very strong storm, a Category 4 on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale. And for a while, it looked like it could track right into Galveston. Just for reference, the 1900 hurricane in Galveston, which led to the largest loss of life from any natural disaster in our nation's history, that was a Category 4 as well. So a lot of nervous time as this storm tracked toward the Texas coast. Eventually it did turn to the right, and the center rode up the Louisiana side of the Texas-Louisiana line and impacted Louisiana most severely. There was still some heavy surf and high tides on the Texas coast, but there were really some areas of devastation across Louisiana, including Lake Charles. Here's a still shot of a radar image from Hurricane Laura. You can see Lake Charles there, and I've sampled some of the points there on the radar, actually showing 155 mile-per-hour winds just off the surface. The radar is measuring those, and you can see the eye is actually over Cameron at this time. And then Lake Charles is in the northern part of what we call the eye wall. The ring around the eye, referred to as the eye wall, that's where the highest winds in the hurricane are found. Now this was the last image that the radar took, and you might guess why. The radar was taking on some of these 150 mile-per-hour plus winds at this time. And you can see the impact on the radar from the winds of Laura. Before, on the left-hand side, you can see what the radar looks like. That big dome up top is a ray dome, hollow, and on the inside you have a very large radar dish. And then after Laura, it was pretty much destroyed. So it took months to repair that radar and bring it back online, but thankfully it is back in operational now. This is the National Weather Service Lake Charles Weather Service radar. Looking at the analyzed wind speed field, I think you'll find this interesting. You can see those 140 mile-per-hour winds concentrated there on the southwest Louisiana coast. But if you go just 100 miles out to the west of there, the winds are quite light, only 30 miles per hour or less. So places like Houston and Galveston, even though Category 4 winds were only 100 miles per 100 miles away, they saw very little wind here and no rain in the Houston-Galveston area. So a lot of people were probably wondering, where is that hurricane? And the truth is, this is not that uncommon to see a very concentrated high wind field. And so if you're near the center or near that eye wall region, you're going to get those high winds. But if you're well outside of that, the winds may be considerably less. The next storm to take a look at, a much different storm. This one was weaker in terms of the winds. This is Tropical Storm Beta, and it made landfall in September. You can see the dates there. It came in as a weak tropical storm, or only 40 mile-per-hour maximum winds, and that even that may be generous. So this did not have a big wind impact on the coastline. But what this did, it moved very slowly. And so there were some areas of very heavy rainfall and flooding. In fact, we had some locations up to 15 inches, maybe even a bit more. So let's take a look at that. And you can look at the radar data and estimate a rainfall. You can see the city of Houston here in this area of reds and purples is a band of very high rainfall amounts. In fact, you can see some pixels in there of 16 to 20 inches of rain. And this is falling in an urban area, so no surprise. Here, like places like Friendswood, Pearland, Bel Air had quite a bit of flooding from this very, very heavy rain band. And then most areas had a more manageable 4 to 8 inches. So this is not uncommon with slow-moving tropical systems to have very heavy rain bands leading to flooding. Of course, Hurricane Harvey was an extreme example of that, where we had some locations with 4 to 5 feet of rainfall. Next storm I want to look at is Hurricane Delta, and notice the date on this. This is October, about October 5th to October 10th. And this storm ended up making landfall at a location very similar to Hurricane Laura over southwest Louisiana again. So those poor folks had just had a Category 4 hurricane with Laura, and now we're looking at another powerful hurricane with Hurricane Delta. Delta did not quite have as high winds as Laura did, but they were Category 2 winds and very strong and damaging. The other thing about Delta is the wind field was larger, and I'll show you that in a moment. So you can see the satellite image here, Delta swirling away to the south of the Louisiana and Texas coasts. And again, this was a very close call for Houston-Galveston. So let's look at the analyzed wind field now, and notice the maximum wind speeds 90 to 100 miles per hour, not the 140 plus we saw with Laura. However, in this case, those higher winds extended much further west. So the point I want to make here is every storm is different. This one was a little bit weaker in terms of the highest winds, but it was larger. So there were some high-end tropical storm winds being felt even down in Galveston and on Bolivar Peninsula and along Galveston Bay. We were seeing wind gusts of 40 to 60 miles per hour. And then finally, to show you that the hurricane season can extend well into October and even through November, we had Hurricane Zeta a late October storm. You can see the dates there, October 25th through October 28th. The track there, I should have pointed this out earlier. What do the colors mean on the track? The red swath indicates hurricane force winds, the yellow 58 mile per hour winds, and the blue tropical storm or 39 mile per hour sustained winds. So you can see that track into, in this case, southeast Louisiana on into Mississippi. So what's changing for this year? One thing I recommend during the hurricane season is looking at hurricanes.gov. That's the National Hurricane Center website. And they're going to start issuing the tropical weather outlooks there routinely on May 15th. They used to start on June 1st, which is the nominal start of hurricane season. But for the past 5 years or so, there have been storms before June 1st. So in recognition of that, they're going to start issuing those routine forecasts earlier. It doesn't mean the hurricane season is starting earlier. It still officially starts June 1st, but just be aware of that. As I mentioned, the Greek alphabet will not be used anymore. We talked about that. And then there's some other things there as well. Another thing I forgot to mention, I mentioned the normal number of hurricanes is 12, but they've just revised those normals to include the last 10 years. And so now the new normal number of named storms is 14, so that's gone up. So that's another change. And again, this just explains the change on hurricanes.gov when looking at the tropical weather outlook, and I recommend you all do that pretty much on a daily basis as we get to late May. You can see here the change in the number of the normals for a normal hurricane season, typically 30 years. They're computed over 30-year periods, and they get updated every 10 years. So now that we're in 2021, we're looking at the period of 1991 to 2020 as our period of record. And you can see that we've jumped from 12 to 14, 6 hurricanes to 7, and the number of major hurricanes stays the same. So what is the forecast for this year? The NOAA forecast is to be released on May 20th, but we do have some forecasts that have been issued, including the one from Colorado State, and they've been doing it the longest, and they are forecasting for a more active than normal season with 17 named storms, 8 hurricanes, and 4 major. So for what it's worth, and in the lower right, you can actually look at a number of other groups and universities that have made forecasts, and they're all coming in pretty much above average. So take that for what it's worth. One thing I want to point out, even if we had a very low number of named storms, if we get a direct hit from just one, it's a very active year. So these outlooks are kind of interesting, but we have to prepare the same way every year. And you can see some links there in the lower left that you can investigate. So here we have some more websites and Twitter and Facebook feeds and YouTube sites that would love to have y'all get familiar with, bookmark, and this is the best way to stay informed during the hurricane season. You can see my email there and my phone number. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And that is all I have.